Good evening, everybody. It's Massimo Banzi and
Benedetta.
I will never learn which way you are. So you are currently connected from an undisclosed holiday.
Okay. Yes, in this very average-looking scenario.
You're even suntan, so don't.
That comes from the backyard.
Okay. I'm in the usual location in Switzerland. I even have my Swiss herbal tea, so I am all set.
So proper.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at me. And so, well, actually, today is a bit of a special episode, right, Professor?
Yes, I'm very lucky to know and work with and be friends with both of our guests today. And so it's kind of like a hangout. I feel like I'm in a virtual living room.
Okay. Well, the other thing, apart from the guests that, special guests, we're actually working on some cool projects that you will see in a few seconds. This is also basically the
second to last
episode of Bar Arduino Worldwide. So next week, July 7, I think 7, is the last episode of this season. But it's going to be a special episode. I don't think we're going to have guests like tonight. It's probably more us kind of reflecting on what we did. And people have been asking to get some, to virtually visit the room where you stream from.
Yes, which I guess now I have to go home and clean and set up properly. But yes, I will show the playroom where all the magic of my household happens.
Yes, we had messages from parents say they wanted to see it, and but get the kids to do it. Can you not tell them it's a fun project?
I will. I'll try. They don't stick to something very long, so don't expect a long tour. But
tell them that Uncle Massimo wants them to do it, and from there. All right, so. Thank you everybody for being connected with us. I can see the numbers of people connected is going up, which is good. Why don't we start with the first guest? I will let you, Benedetta, introduce the next guest.
Yes.
While I will add her to the stream.
I mean, I do a really horrible job at this, so I'm just going to make it really brief. And so today we have Tega Brain, who's an artist and also a colleague of mine at NYU. And we teach and we do some really interesting projects together. And she's going to talk to us about her work.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm calling in from Brooklyn. So I think I'm the only... You're out of town, Benedetta, so I'm the only one from New York here today. But yes, I'm calling from my living room where I've been for the last 3.5 months, as you would expect. So really transformed my relationship to home, I think, this whole pandemic. But yeah, I'm an artist, but with a background in environmental engineering. So think a lot about hybrid practices that try to bring together art, engineering, and ask questions by doing that. So of both disciplines. And as mentioned, I also teach and work at NYU in the Integrated Digital Media program. So we teach a lot of physical computing, but also UX and web design and that kind of thing. But I'm originally from Sydney, so that's my accent is the Australian accent there, and I've been in the US for the last 7 years or so. So I guess I'll just jump in and share a few projects. Can you see my screen?
Now we can.
There you can, and I'll full screen it to make it look a bit better. Is that good?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. So most of the time now I do art projects. I also am involved with a few other communities here in New York. So I contribute to the P5JS project, which I'm sure many of your people in your audience have heard about. And also sometimes work with the School for Poetic Computation, which is an independent school / research group / art residency here in New York that really looks at computation as a medium for art practice, and also for thinking with, you know, critical theory and these sort of like hybrid ways of working. But yeah, I thought I'd share just a couple projects today. I sort of pulled out projects that I think are most relevant for the sort of physical computing conversations. And yeah, I think I'll start with this one, which was a project that I did a few years ago now, in the context of, I was doing it for an I-beam residency. And I was really looking at this concept I was working with called eccentric engineering. So like, how could we rethink what engineering is? How could we learn from like art practices that really celebrate things like glitch or like failure in systems, and think about what that shows us about our infrastructures and engineered systems? So when a system breaks, you know, we obviously, it's an opportunity for us to think about the values that system is materializing and the what is considered success or failure in that system. And then, you know, in a moment of failure, what else it might do. So it obviously produces a different kind of unexpected behavior. And I was really kind of interested in this, which is definitely like thinking that's come out of the arts. And so this particular work takes the form of 3 Wi-Fi routers. And so it really looks at the relationship we have with like wireless networks. And I was kind of making this argument through this project that just like there are organisms in the world called radiotropes who sort of orientate their behavior based on radiation, that I was thinking about humans in this kind of context, right? Where we really like change our behaviors depending on whether there's a Wi-Fi signal or not, and we're very attuned to the speed and presence of networks. And so could this sort of like sensitivity that we have to Wi-Fi be leveraged to change our relationship with these infrastructures? And so the first router in the series is called an orbit. And it's a router where the signal strength and data speed of the router changes over a 28-day cycle in response to the lunar cycle. So the lunar cycle is obviously 28 days as well. So if that means for like one day a month you have really strong, amazing internet, and one day a month you have none, and it sort of ebbs and flows over that period. So what if our networks were very much like in dialogue with natural cycles? What would that look like? And so, yeah, when I showed these pieces, you know, you can go into the gallery and like connect to the network, and it will give you some information about where it is in the cycle and so forth. So another one in the series is a router that is sort of built in a collaborative relationship with a plant, a house plant. In this case, you can see this lovely lily here. And if you have a look closely, you can see that the plant is equipped with a camera. So there's that long tube on the side. There is like this little USB camera. And so the plant is able to take photos of itself and do what's called an injection attack to those on its network. So it would take out any JPEGs that is being viewed on its network and replace them with images of itself. And so in this way, like when you're on the network, any unencrypted website at the time, you would see images of coming from the plant rather than coming from the server, the original server. I'm a bit sad about this one because, of course, like this was made in 2015, so it was sort of right at the moment when the web was really becoming encrypted. So as you can see in this video, like when I made it, you know, you could do this sort of man-in-the-middle attack with like Instagram and Tinder, and like most of the apps were unencrypted. Of course, now that's changed, which is really great because it means, you know, the internet's more secure, but it also means that this project doesn't really work anymore, which is a little bit sad. And the final piece in the series is called Open Flame, and this particular Wi-Fi router pairs a candle with the network, so that in order to bring up your Wi-Fi network, you have to light the candle. In order to turn your Wi-Fi network off, you would blow the candle out. So, you know, in this particular piece, I was really interested in this kind of like relationship we have to fire, right? So fire has brought great advantage to our civilization through electricity, but also, of course, it's like brings great risk. So, we reshape our cities and rebuild based on fire codes. Of course, combustion has led us to this place where we're dealing with climate change. And so this sort of relationship to combustion is something that has been, significant for civilization. And so what would that mean to like bring it to the domestic space and have fire be this sort of like this thing that's sort of standing in between you and your wireless network. So as an interaction technology, if you like. So do you want me to talk a little bit about the technologies that are used in these, or would that be helpful? Because each one of them is actually using a slightly different hardware setup. And it's been a while since I've made and pulled these apart. So let me just think back and remember for you. So this, I spent a long time messing around with Linux and OpenWRT, which is like an open source Linux distribution. And so each one actually ended up using a slightly different setup. So the Orbit project, the Orbit router was using just a really cheap, inexpensive, like $25 wireless router, open source. I'm sure you could probably still get them. And this particular router just had an OpenWRT install on it. But the reason I ended up finding it is because that particular router had a series of like, GPIO pins on it and power pins. So it meant that I could install a sensor if I wanted to on this particular setup. The plant is running off a Raspberry Pi. So it's just a Pi. Obviously, there's a few sensors in the soil that determine what the plant's behavior is. So like whether it's taking the photo and how much sort of manipulation of the network it was doing. So I think it was using a moisture sensor, a light level sensor. And I spent such a long time with this project trying to figure out, how do you make an assessment of plant health, right? Like, is there a sort of just a thing you can sense that will tell you like if a plant is healthy or not? And that ended up being like a whole rabbit hole, which was way more complicated than I sort of initially envisaged, because obviously every plant species is different. Every plant species wants different conditions. Like, where do you get the data around that? Like, for example, soil moisture data matching like this particular species of lily. And so that was really a lot of sort of testing and development to kind of get to that solution. I looked up a lot of research where people are doing like, photosynthetic estimations based on like leaf color and these sorts of things. So it is a problem that a lot of like artists and of course like plant scientists have also looked at. But I was really also looking for like DIY, low cost sort of solutions.
But I like how you gave like the plant like some like I feel like there's a lot of projects that are sort of monitoring like plant health and like maybe visualizing it, which is, super useful. But I like how you gave the plant some sort of control level where based on those things, it would act on, the network, or it would just actually have some sort of power to interact, when like the other ones are very much like usually very passive. You're kind of observing and monitoring. You actually like gave the plant like a personality and a life and actions that it can take, which I thought was really unique.
Yeah, and there's a lot of projects which is like, translating the plant state into like tweets or language or messaging or something like that. And for this project, it was really important for me to actually give the plant, the moon, the fire, like the agency to actually like turn the network off in a way that might be like really annoying for those using it. So I wanted to really give it the control, as opposed to a lot of these kind of other kind of experimental UX projects where it's the other sort of non-human actors in it sort of have less control or less agency to actually disrupt things. And, I think it comes back to this question of like, although, when your internet goes down, it's a real like it can be very disruptive and very negative and very like dangerous in a lot of situations, but it also does produce different modes of collaborating, different modes of communicating, and different registers of attention. And so I think I was trying to get into that conversation and thought process. And this candle one, I think this candle one was actually the open source router paired with an Arduino, and the Arduino was taking care of the sensing and then communicating with the router that was taking care of the networking. So this was sort of a hybrid hardware setup. Yeah. And
there's such beautiful objects. You've there's a lot of material that you've played with. I love the orbit, actual moon looking rock. That was a 3D scan of a moon rock that I convinced a NASA scientist to send to me. And of course it was itty bitty. So I scaled it up and then made a mold and cast the rock. That's awesome.
So I did spend a lot of time thinking about that. This particular one is just a couple of heat sensors. So the top heats, it's just looking for difference between the air above the candle and the air inside the actual box. So that was my kind of DIY flame detection system that was built into this one.
Are there any natural cycles you're looking at now or that you're being inspired by at the moment?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've talked about our project that we're working on together.
A little bit a while ago.
Solar. Yeah, so I think a lot of the thinking from this Being Radiotropic series relates to a project that, I'm working on with Benny about solar-powered servers and solar-powered websites and what solar energy means in terms of designing front-end web technologies and web interfaces. And again, this question of I think a lot of our interface design is about making the server or the conditions at the server or the place where the information is coming from, making that invisible. So, you don't know where the data center is, often you don't know the company that's running it or anything like that. And so, thinking about renewables and how could you kind of celebrate the conditions at the server or make that a part of the front end of the website. So I think there's a lot shared there in that the way we live is at the whim of natural cycles and environmental conditions. And so how could sort of computing technologies be thought of more as farming, right? Where you're actually in touch with environmental conditions or cycles, I think or gardening or something like that. Could we sort of take cues from different fields or different practices that are sort of more attuned to the world in a way, rather than always trying to just design it out. I mean, I can share another project if we've got time or.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the other one I pulled out of my archive because it also involves some physical computing and Arduino is a project that I guess taps into a lot of these questions around interface design and how we could think more experimentally about our digital interfaces. And this project came out of a whole lot of work that I did around data visualization. And I was doing things like hacking energy meters and taking the data and presenting them as projections or visual information visualizations. And I started wanting to, I guess, arrive at a more critical position around data viz. So the idea that it conceals as much as it reveals, and that all data visualizations produce a certain perspective of the world. They're not objective. There's a politics to the way that they are presented. And so I started looking into other ways of presenting information and looking at other sensations like smell or olfaction. And so this project, What the Frog's Nose Tells the Frog's Brain, is an electricity meter But instead of presenting that electricity information as visual information, it actually emits a smell when a certain threshold is passed of power use in a building. So I worked with a perfumer and we developed a specific fragrance, like that was quite smoky and had a lot of like cade oil in it. And so then, yeah, like what you don't see here is there's a sort of like a power clip that you can install in the electricity box of the space where you're showing it. And then it wirelessly transmits the energy data back to this device. And then at a particular threshold, the device will release a scent. And of course, you know, it opens up this really interesting conversation around smell, right? Because smell doesn't work in the same way as visual information. You know, the body perceives change in smell. And if you're in a room with a bad smell or a specific smell, you'll notice that after a few minutes, that perception, like this perception of smell disappears because you're really good at detecting difference. And so it's a really different way of just encountering information. And obviously, oh, sorry, yeah, go on.
No, there's so much information in the smell. It's amazing.
And it brings up memory and association, and like people have different kind of experiences mapped to smell. So it's like, no way is it the same for everyone. And so, yeah, I mean, this project, yeah, was really a way in to working with smell. And I went on and have done a bit more work in this space. But yeah, you can see it's built with, a power meter, and then there's some Arduino in there as well. It's doing some of the actuation of the physical components.
What was the experience like to work with somebody who designs scents for a living? Like, what was the language like?
Well, perfumers are very secretive, I found.
I know. I feel like, because every time I like high-end perfumes that have these like super like visual yet esoteric descriptions of the ingredients and like what it's supposed to like transport you to. And I'm always like fascinated by the people behind them. So
yeah. And, you know, we worked together for a few weeks doing this, and he would never let me in the lab. Like, we would have these meetings and he'd be like, okay. And then he'd come with some samples and we'd work that way, but he would never let me in to see his space or, it was really interesting. And, you know, there's a lot of chemistry in it, obviously, as well. Like, designing smell is very much also about designing how like molecules behave through time. So you have like the low notes, the mid notes, and the high notes. And the high notes are the parts of the smell that like dissipate really fast. So often they're like floral scents or lemon or citrus. The low notes are the parts of the smell that will like persist for a really long time.
Linger.
Yeah, you know, and you'll come back. I don't know, I can't think of an example right now, but you know, when you have spilt something or whatever and you come back the next day and it's still there, you know, like that's the low note, the molecules that will persist. And then there's mid notes, of course. So it's about like balancing those three kind of temporal spaces with how you're designing fragrance. It's fascinating. I mean, yeah, these people are such artists, and they have such a sensitivity to that, in that, like, you know, I can't detect with my nose half the things that, you know, he could, of course. But again, you know, this meter, like, it's funny to think of it as a meter, like, because it doesn't really work, right? Like, its failure is sort of the point of the project, where you can smell like the moment that it releases the thing, but then like it doesn't really give you any like quantification of the information behind it. So yeah, it just operates in a totally different way than other meters.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah. It's on a shelf in my studio. I should resurrect it at NYU or get it going somewhere.
It's somebody a few weeks ago was talking about like having to try one of their like old projects again to see if it even worked. And so I feel like that's always like an interesting experience to resurrect a previous project to see how it has aged.
Yeah, and going through this like code that maybe you wrote like 8 years ago, and you're like, who wrote this? Yeah,
it's like a trip in memory lane.
Totally. So,
Awesome.
yeah, that would definitely be that experience. Like, yeah, it would need some maintenance, I would say.
It'd be interesting what the smell reminds you of now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one reason I haven't shown it again recently, is because I need to get more of the fragrance.
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, the mechanism in it is quite funny. Like, I think nowadays there's many more like vaporizers and sort of like smell distribution technologies via like vaporizing liquids. But I couldn't at the time. I mean, I made this probably like 6 or 7 years ago, maybe longer. And I couldn't find one that would work the way I wanted it to work. So this was my solution, which is like a fan goes on, and then the perfume bottle like sprays its contents into the airstream of the fan, and that was how I designed the distribution.
I think that's still pretty much how most people do it.
Oh yeah, okay.
I think that's, I mean, yeah.
Because I just go into Muji and like all these stores, and they have such fancy like
air
vapor things, yeah. I think maybe there are more options now, but who knows?
Some positive comments from the chat. Somebody says super work, so it's nice. All right, so thank you for showing us your projects, like super interesting, and also telling us a little bit about the technology behind them, because also that's a lot of the people here like kind of the nerdy part as well, so they know how things are made. Thanks for actually taking the time to explain that. That was actually quite useful for a lot of our audience.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if there are questions, please ask them in the chat. But actually, if you're watching this video recorded, you can actually ask questions in the comment sections, and then we'll try to do our best to get them answered. All right, so, well, for now, we're gonna thank you, and we'll ask you to stick around for a little bit, because we bring everybody back at the end so that we can say goodbye to the audience. And you know, we love the work. Some guys say we love the nerdy parts. Come on.
always.
We're trying to elevate the discourse. We can't avoid it. All right. So if you stick around a little bit longer, if you can, would love to have you back at the end so that we can answer maybe some last minute question, or just say goodbye to the audience.
Sure. Yeah,
Thanks
happy
for
to.
being here for now, and I'll bring you back online at the end of the show.
Thank you, Tega.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye.
All right. So that was like very cool stuff, huh?
Yes, I think it's super interesting to think about, systems that we might not necessarily think about in conjunction with technology.
Mm-hmm. No, yes, absolutely. So now we are in that kind of middle part of the show where we have a couple of things from contribution from people from within the Arduino. So first of all, the discount code for tonight is San Jose, which you have to type all in one word, all in caps, into the Arduino store if you want to get a little discount. The code is San Jose because one of the small contributions that we're going to show you in a second come from somebody who works at Arduino but lives in San Jose, California. And so there's also something else we've been starting to do in the last few shows, which is this thing that we call now Arduino Bytes. We're collecting this 1 minute kind of bytes of information, of knowledge about Arduino. So today we have one of the people who work for Arduino from Sweden, Rashid, who's talking about one of the unknown things about one of the latest Arduino products. So let's have a look at what he has to say.
Did you guys know that the Arduino Uno Wi-Fi Wrap 2 has the same form factor as classic Arduino Uno? But it comes with a lot of extra features. As the name implies, it has a Wi-Fi connectivity, so you can start working on your next IoT project. Also, it has an IMU with 3-axis accelerometer and 3-axis gyroscope. For instance, you can create your own motion tracking device just by using this board. Simply include the Arduino LSM6DS3 library and you're good to go. And if you want to display the movement through different colors, then there is an integrated RGB LED on the board which you can control through the Wi-Fi Nano module. If Wi-Fi isn't your thing and you want to use the board to communicate via Bluetooth or BLE without needing extra hardware, then you just need to use 1.2.1 Wi-Fi Nano version or newer and add the Arduino BLE library to your sketch.
Haha.
Very cool.
There you go. Yeah, there's actually some very nice thing that you can do because that board has this combination of the ESP32 based module with this processor, which is the same family of the Atmega 328 in the normal Arduino Uno, but it's a model with more memory, more capabilities. And the USB to serial converter on this board supports also debugging. So if you're using the Atmel tools, you can actually debug the code using the Atmel tools. So a lot of cool stuff. So the second thing we wanted to show you tonight is, as I mentioned, our colleague Dominic, who's based in San Jose, California, has been working with me a bit in the last few months on this topic of tiny machine learning. And we experimented with a few, we've been experimenting with a few things. And we're mostly building these examples that show really basic machine learning libraries, because obviously everybody thinks about TensorFlow, and we built a bunch of things with TensorFlow Microlite. But we're also looking at very basic things like the nearest neighbor, and we're also simple, old, quote unquote, libraries, algorithms. And so Dom has been building these nice things where he uses a processing or P5.js front end that talks to the software running in the Arduino, so we can visualize things. And one of the latest things that we did is to use connect a chip camera to an Arduino Nano BLE Sense, which it's
you can do that? That's amazing.
Yes, you can. You remember when I was in New York in January, I bought this camera that was like, it cost about $9 in New York, but you can buy it for like $3 on eBay. You basically have to connect every single pin of the Arduino Nano to it. But you can do some amazing things. So I'm going to show you this quick video where he's explaining these things. There's also a blog post that comes, well, there's all the details on how to do this, but let's show the video.
We launched the Arduino TensorFlow Lite library with Google last year, and this was super exciting because it showed that deep learning is not only possible on microcontrollers, it's something that you can do at your desk today in a few minutes. So the library itself comes with a few examples. There's a micro speech example, there's a vision example that does person detection, and there's a gesture example, which is a magic wand. We also made some fun workshop tutorials where you can train your own neural network using Keras in Colab, and these ran in a whole load of developer workshops worldwide. We also created some blogs so you can try this at home. Now all of this stuff is focused on the Arduino Nano BLE Sense. So this Arduino board is perfect for tiny ML because it combines a ton of onboard sensors plus a powerful Cortex-M4 microcontroller to crunch through those algorithms. Now, running deep learning on Arduino with TensorFlow is super powerful, but it's not the only kind of machine learning possible. There's a whole load of classical machine learning, which is very applicable to smaller data sets on embedded devices, which are also more intuitive and easier to use. So we've also created the Arduino KNN library, which is the K nearest neighbor algorithm, which allows you to, in a single sketch, collect a bunch of different example data and start inferring stuff without any off-device training or any of that. So the example in the blog we created shows you how to classify fruit by color, but people have done candy, vegetables, even Pokemon. Of course, the only downside of using a color sensor is that you can't tell the difference between objects of the same color. But if you want to do some image recognition, you need to connect an external camera. And last week we released a blog on how to do that, how to get the low-cost Omnivision 7670 camera module and connect them to your Arduino Nano BLE Sense. There's a lot of jumpers to connect, but it's not that hard. And actually, the library is super simple to install. It's just there in the Arduino Library Manager. You click Install, and we have a few examples there, including a little app so you can visualize the image coming off of your camera. TinyML vision applications don't need super high resolution images. What I've done here is created a little web demo that shows you the downsampled image data coming off of your Arduino. You can grab some examples of different objects, and I've also made it so it spits out some Arduino code you can paste into your sketch, and now your sketch will recognize those objects. So that's really nice, I think, as a little example. So, an orange and a kumquat, for example, are both orange, but it can tell the difference between them. One thing about KNN, though, is it's not super scalable. It's keeping a copy of every example image you give it in memory, and it's comparing against them each time it does the inferencing. So speed and memory usage are obviously going to take a hit the bigger the data set you have. And this is where more advanced machine learning algorithms come in handy, and we'll be talking about those in the future.
That's super cool. I can't wait to play with that. Where is the documentation for?
At the moment you go to blog.arduino.cc, there's this article that explains how to use this. And the library, actually I have to say, the library was written by one of our former colleagues, Sandeep Mistry, who did something really, really amazing, because he basically he took the Linux driver for this camera and ported it to Arduino. So it was kind of a bit of magic.
It's a lot of
yeah, so we are very interested about this camera because it's actually quite, as I said, it's low cost. You can buy for like $9. It's quite simple. And we realized that if you build a sketch with it, you're left with quite a bit of flash and RAM still. So I think the next step would be to interface this thing with TensorFlow, so that we can do TensorFlow Micro using this camera. And so it's going to be a very kind of low-cost setup for doing simple machine learning vision. So, it's going to be interesting.
And a great beginning for somebody who wants to just get started and get a better sense of what that means.
Yeah, for example, using this KNN library introduces you to the principles behind machine learning. So, because unfortunately, a lot of books that you see around, they say, oh, yeah, just teach you about machine learning very quickly. And then the first page is like a gigantic formula. And this obviously kind of kills the mood for a lot of people. While something that starts from very, very old algorithms, we also have a library that has a single neuron, a single perceptron. So we've shown the example of recognizing colors using all these very old algorithms. So you can start to build your knowledge from like little small building blocks and then move forward. So I think, it's I'm very interested about in this stuff, in the concept of tiny machine learning, but also in using it to teach the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the machine learning stuff that you see around is designed for people who have advanced degrees. They don't tend to explain the principle. All right. So we have, let me remind people of the discount code. So for example, if you wanted to buy one of these Nano BLE Sense, you can drop in this code and you'll get, I think it's like a $5 discount, which is, hey, it's a small discount for you to try out this product. And So let's see if there are any questions.
Yeah, a couple of questions. One around face recognition.
So yeah, somebody's asking about face recognition using Arduino. I think it's face recognition. No, too complicated. Using this camera and probably the right algorithm, you might be able to do face detection. So you might be able to tell if in an image there is a face. That's probably as much as you can do with a tiny board like that one. Somebody's asking if the protocol is SPI. No, it is a delightful combination of a bunch of protocols because there is I2C to talk to the main chip on the board, and then the data is transferred as an 8-bit parallel bus. That's why we are basically using 16 wires.
Yeah, all of them. It's one side at a time.
Yeah, it is possible for the community to build a cheap alternative to combine object and QR code recognition. I think it would be technically possible to build a QR code decoder using this camera, this Arduino. I'm pretty sure it might be possible. It depends on the resolution of the image, but since it's black and white, I think Dom has started to publish some examples on how you extract black and white images from this camera. So you basically end up with a black and white images that can be used for computer vision. A lot of computer vision algorithms run on black and white images anyway, well, on gray level images anyway. So you can do that. The other thing that we're going to try is that there is famous data set of all these handwritten digits. It's the classic algorithm, and that has been implemented in TensorFlow several times. So it might be interesting to have this thing that you can point a number at it and it will kind of detect it. It's obviously not super useful to have something that detects one digit at a time, but so somebody's asking about STM32 in Arduino. Actually, there is a product that we launched a few months ago called Portenta, which is using a very, very powerful STM32 processor. It's actually a dual-core Cortex M7 and Cortex M4, which we launched as part of this Arduino Pro initiative. So it's a very powerful tool, and we also developed essentially the code on top of EmbedOS. So the idea is that you can even access the operating system, so you can do very cool things. Last question, where can we buy the camera? So basically you can buy the camera on eBay or Amazon.com very easily. It is called, if you just look for OV7670 module, and you make sure that it looks like the one in the picture, it's usually about $10, $9, and it can be found on Alibaba for something like $3. So,
but in quantity of 3,000.
yeah, somebody's asking for any plans for low-cost Arduino plus Wi-Fi boards. Well, we have the Arduino Nano IoT, which is something like $18. It's reasonably low cost, considering that the module that we are using, it's a very high quality module with a very good antenna. So, you know, it's low cost within in a way, the way we do things that tends to be at a reasonably high quality. There's a lot of Wi-Fi modules that are vaguely Arduino compatible, but they normally don't have any certification. They're quite bad in terms of the quality. So, you know, $18 is not that bad. All right, so let's go to the next segment. We have another guest. His name is Pedro, and we are going to add him to the stream right now. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Benny.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Welcome.
You beat me with names. They made fun of me in a few episodes ago because I shared my middle name and all of my last names. I have to say that I think you have me beat on the number of names or letters.
Yeah. So that's why I just put a Pedro. I think it's easy this way.
Yes, I hear you. Pedro, I don't want to introduce you because I do a terrible job, but also because you do a million different things between artist, researcher, designer, art director, you teach. So I'm going to let you talk to us about yourself.
Sure. So let's jump into it. I think I'm going to share the full screen, right?
Yeah, share this. Oh, okay. Let me.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for having me. As Benny mentioned, my name is Pedro. I'm an artist, researcher, and educator now based in New York City. I'm originally from Brazil. I've been here since 2012. My practice expands from interactive media pieces, generative art, some wearables, hardware interfaces. I think the easiest way to explain a little bit what I'm into it's with this graph. Like I'm not a big fan of technology for the sake of technology. So what I like is technology that's kind of like inspired by human potential and human relations. And also I like to research technologies that can kind of stimulate new human potentials and also improve human relations. I think it's easy to say that my work, it's kind of like a practice that's research-based. So here you can see with a collaborator of mine, Zuri Chan, and we are combining, in this case, an Arduino Micro, Bluetooth radio, and some electrochromic film to build this wearable piece. We wanted to address the topic of privacy and surveillance capitalism. So we built this data-driven wearable that kind of turns transparent. So reminding us that in the digital realm, we're all naked. We are using and researching geolocation data that's being like mined and extracted by like the big like internet providers, or anytime you're checking for like the weather or just checking your email, not only if you're looking for position, they still know where you are. So we thought it'd be interesting to kind of show like the boroughs of New York when you're moving, like different parts turn transparent. This is another piece that actually I think Benny saw in the show before. And I was researching, and I was doing this research with Eric Rosenthal about archiving media for perpetuity. And I became more and more interested with this idea of like consuming media and also sometimes being consumed by media. So I built this series of generative music sculptures that start with an Arduino Uno and later became shrunk into like these 80 tiny custom circuit boards that I acid etch. And what I wanted was this idea that if you could experiment the musics in a way that only exists in the time they're actually listening. So it's not a recording the music there, it's the music's being generated in real time. It's almost like a fractal of music. And also I thought it'd be interesting to later display almost this like this archaeology way, or sometimes we have like taxidermy pieces. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of think as a timeline to display these devices that never exist. Most recent, I start to research how the environment and water quality affects like some small communities. And I built this, which again started with like some sketches and an Arduino, and later ended up building some custom circuits for, and combining spectral analysis with some contrast and water quality. And this idea is actually to grow the microorganism in the board itself. I know usually you don't want any contamination. You want your cleans, your electronics really, really nice. But these I built some capacitive and some resistant matrix on the board. And the idea is actually to have microorganisms growing on the board. And I'm experimenting with this idea of this becoming kind of like the entropy, building entropy for that. So once I put the SD card with some photographs, my idea is to create what I'm calling like a bioglitch. I was inspired by this Korean photographer that used expired and contaminated 35mm film. So my idea maybe is to do a residency and do a series of glitched portraits. I know those projects that I've been showing right now, it's kind of like broad and they kind of like all over the place, but I feel like they still follow under this triangle of mine, which is it's trying to find a balance in between art and design, social and critical inquiry, and technology. And it's not every project goes there and finds this perfect balance, but the project that I want to talk next kind of, for me, hits kind of a sweet spot. And this is a project that I call Backslash, and I did it with the same collaborator that I showed the wearable piece before. I was interested in how technology is becoming like a really important and playing a really important role in the modern wave of protests. This is a photo from Brazil, the wave of protests in 2013. But now we've been hearing about and seeing technology being used since the Arab Spring, Occupy Central, the most recent demonstrations. And what I wanted to research was actually that first, the technology being used by the authorities, right? So we have a lot of them being used, not only the tear gas and the less lethal weapons that we see, but also active denial system, long-range acoustic devices, water cannons, sound cannons, Stingray, which is this fake cell towers that they use to capture information from the protesters. And when I saw on the side of the protesters, we only saw kind of like the social media and some kind of DIY protection gear. And you can see it's kind of a little bit uneven. And probably right now, most people are like already aware how like Twitter, Facebook, and some other social media play like an important role, like in the Egyptian uprising, and the later far chat, like in Occupy Hong Kong, the umbrella movement in Taiwan. So, however, I found that was like really interesting that during the Arab Spring movement, the highest levels of participation was actually when they have internet blackouts. And this happened because besides being young, digital native, early adopter, like the more the protesters believe that connectivity is a basic human right. So that's what I decided to do. I thought it was important to shine a light to these and having this conversation of this kind of technology that not everybody's talking about. And to do so, I decided to build a series of wearables or gadgets that can do two main things to ask those questions. How can protesters communicate and retain the right to protest? And how can protesters and journalists spread messages while evading like use of censorship and surveillance technologies? So I knew, and also because I was coming from Brazil and I was researching the scenarios like all over the globe, I knew that I couldn't develop a one-size-fits-all solution for those, but I wanted to address different scenarios and I wanted to really be researching what was happening. Not every protest is like Hong Kong, where the average protester had at least like 3 devices connected to the internet. They were like college students, they were still like doing their homeworks, like studying for finals and have tablets, computers, cell phones. So here you can see a few of those. We don't have too much time, but I can talk a little bit about some of those. One of the scenarios that I was interesting about was this idea how cell phones became almost like a tool for a revolution in some places. People like recording the abuse of authorities, like streaming live, like and being like showing what was happening on those movements. But a lot of the time, because of that, sometimes like authorities were like breaking those phones or like confiscating and in the worst cases, it was actually the only people that were actually streaming this or taking the photos was the ones that later end up getting targeted or getting in trouble. So I thought if I could build what I call a black box, a way that it could connect it to a different device and then like share those photos, strip all the metadata. In this case, if something happened, you still have the record of what was happening during the protests. Another device that I built, which is this one on the center, was as a response to this protest that was happening during Sochi in Russia. And then we noticed that a lot of people, just from being close to the wave of protests, just being close to those protest sites, later than that getting targeted because they were using Stingrays and some like scanners and fake cell phone towers. So we thought if we could build some kind of like a personal low power jammer, in this case, you still use your phone, but nobody will be able to tell that you're being close to it. Not everybody, not every protest, not every event has, and not every community have a lot of like cell phones with like smartphones, cameras and everything. And I thought it was important to address that as well. So we decided to build this independent network with like wearable devices and radios and infrared and other things that allowed someone to kind of express this idea of a technique that was being used a lot in Brazil called bottlenecking. Here they call cattling now, which is the idea that we're closing some of the streets and forcing the flow of those participants, demonstrators, and protests so they can later be like beaten or arrested. So I thought it'd be interesting to almost create like a panic button. So like 5-10 blocks away from those, if someone was getting in trouble, they could communicate to other people so they can try to find a different route. And the last one, which is in this corner here right now, what was actually a response to this idea of mesh network, which was becoming something really big. But I haven't seen too much of this idea of like in a hardware that would address this idea of like a fast deployment router. So you could just pull a pin, almost like a canister, and immediately you have like a mesh network that even during internet blackouts, protesters, journalists, and other people can still communicate. I think it's important to mention that we didn't start this because we had this really strong political agenda in mind, but we thought that was important to have this conversation, kind of address and try to research this kind of technology that being used by the states against protesters, both for like crowd control and also like message control. And we were asking these questions like, in the future, how would the underground fight back? We didn't start this thinking we'd solve or find any of the solutions, and we're far from doing that. But I thought it'd be an interesting way to use this to have a conversation, to maybe later run like workshops and talking to some people in hacker spaces and with some grassroots movements as well. So I know we don't have much time for me to go over each one of those devices, but if you're interested in know a little bit more, you can go to backslash.cc, or we can also find us and keep this conversation going on Twitter. We have a /CC handle, which we kind of post and research a lot of the technology being used against protesters and technology around protest sites and periods of crisis. I can hear.
I can't hear my. Oh, it's.
Oops.
Oh, I know, me too.
I need to invent an Arduino device that handles my mute button. I said, no, it's great projects and also very kind of relevant to what's happening right now, because there's all these protests happening in different parts of the world and people are having lots of different issues with that. So, yeah, so have you ever tested them in a real protest, or?
we have. As I mentioned, we didn't build this as a solution, and we want more like to kind of use this as a research piece. We have tested some pieces on the field, but yeah, I'll leave it like that.
I remember this was like you've been working on this project for quite some time, so I was curious if like the latest events have kind of changed your perception of the piece, or if like it give you ideas for other things you want to expand on, or if you are still kind of currently doing research on what are the tools out there and how have they evolved.
I think one of the things that changed, and I see like a biggest change, is actually information. I see people way more aware of like the technology being used against. You see a lot of people talking about like, oh, don't post photos of the protests without blurring someone's face, right? Which is something that when I started this project was something that nobody was caring about. Or people say, oh, don't bring your cell phones to protest, or if you do it, put in airplane mode. So you hear more and more people talking about that. But when we were doing the research, was something that's still kind of like new, and nobody was putting all those pieces together, I feel like. Yeah. One thing that's interesting about when I was, as you mentioned, I've been doing this for quite a while now. When I was actually building the router piece, which was a lot inspired by the Arduino Yun, but it was like this really small board. Was actually a time that actually I met Massimo before. I was talking to Tom, and I was like, oh, I'm building this kind of like a small router piece that's kind of inspired. I wanted to have. And then one thing that I had done at that time was adding like a crypto chip and a way to do like a random number generator, because I thought it was important. And I remember Massimo saying like, oh, I think that's a good idea. I think the board should have like a crypto thing on it. So I think that was something that I was researching. I think people are more and more aware of this kind of stuff right now.
Oh, yeah. In fact, it was interesting because I saw that one of the pictures was somebody wearing some kind of a scarf on their face, and there was a pattern on it. And I wonder if that pattern is designed to confuse the face recognition algorithms. Yeah,
I didn't talk about that because it's more of like a software base. It's not a hardware based piece, but it's a way to avoid face recognition. But it's also a way embed. We also embedded like a hash on it, so it's a way also to unlock other messages. So someone later could even send like analog photo to, and you still will be able to hash and encode some image. So it's like it's a twofer. It's like you have two different purposes on it. Yeah.
So there's a question that says, how does the panic button communicate with each other?
Can you say?
So somebody's asking about the panic button and how they communicate.
Yeah. So the panic button at the time we built based in two things. We had a radio on it, which was like a something close to what it was a LoRa today. It was a different radio at the time they were using. But another thing that we did add, it was we built our own protocol, infrared protocol. So if you have a router or some other things close to you, they can also do like a quick connection using the infrared, and that would trigger to the radio as well. So we're doing two things in once.
All right.
So if they try to jam the radio, we also have the infrared. So that was the two ways that we did.
There was also a comment about the style and the design of your projects, which I completely agree with, because you come at it from the research perspective, but when people talk about research projects, they don't expect the quality and aesthetic that actually goes into your work. So I definitely second that comment around the beauty of the things that you make.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I'm into, and I thought that would help the conversation at the time. I think because what's a lot of this technical gear being used on the protest, I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation and use this as a tool to spark the conversation as well. So that's what I designed that way.
And the tape pieces too.
Let's see if there are other questions. There's a question I don't understand. Pedro, you do the backlash with the... Okay. I don't, unfortunately, understand. It is difficult for me to understand. All right. So, great projects. As I said, very relevant to where we are right now in the world, because I can see a lot of people who actually join this protest. They sometimes don't even have really an understanding of all these kind of technical issues. They don't even know that these stingrays exist, or how, in a way, the government monitors who goes to these things. And so there are, I think it's important to have a project that kind of explains these issues and tries to find solutions. And maybe it would be good if there was more people joining the project, making it more popular. So, Paul, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing us your project. So we are actually right now, let's see if there are more questions right now. So there are no more new questions right now, because we are actually going towards the end of the show. So we wanted to bring back Tega so that we can all say good night to the audience. And so first of all, I want to thank the guests, because the projects are amazing. And also you are the last guests of this season. So you are, it's always best to be the first or the last ones in a series. And so you are the last ones in the series. So thank you for being with us. And also thank you for Benedetta for inviting you guys.
It was just selfishness. I wanted to hang out, so.
Okay. Well, you hang out with interesting people, no? It's so that works very well for Arduino as well. All right, thank you. So first of all, there's a question. What's the best way to get a job in IoT? Oh my God, that's a very difficult question. Wow. We'll make a special show just on that one. I don't even have the answer to that question. So
I think it's make your own, unfortunately.
I would say build cool projects and share them, and then we'll help you much more than having some CV. That CVs are all looking the same. So if you have cool projects. Oh, look at that. So somebody is saying, I don't understand why someone would need localized communication during a protest. I mean, people are getting beaten up, right? They wouldn't have time to pull their phone and communicate. Well, I don't know. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually like the project addressed two things. One is a localized communication, which is depending on the protest that you have is actually much broader than you expect. It's kind of like goes like kilometers away. The other thing is a way to communicate from inside to outside. So we're looking to a lot of like things that happen in some authoritarian places, not only here for the US, but in some other countries as well, have different laws. So how can journalists talk to how someone from inside can communicate outside and give information? I think right now we're kind of like a little bit spoiled because we know everything's happening all the time. It's almost like live. Everybody's always almost connected. But I think it's important to understand that sometimes countries go dark, and then it's hard for us to know what's happening.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Thank you. So this was the last question. And if you have more questions, write them in the comments, and we'll answer them because there's a bunch of people who watches this recorded on YouTube. So we'll have to relay some questions later.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for being here in the last, second to last episode of Arduino. Now it's time to say goodbye to the audience. Tega, you can start. If you have something you want to plug, say goodbye.
Oh, I'm prepared to do a promo. I just want to plug, police abolition and jail abolition and support all the amazing protests that are going here in New York. And we all need to, get on board with that and support them. That's my plug. But no, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been really fun.
It's our pleasure. Pedro.
Yeah, I would just continue with that. Just get involved and educate yourself. I think that's the best plug right now.
Yeah, it's been great that lockdown has ended in protest and revolution. It's been really nice to see that happen here.
Yeah, and now all these gatherings of people will bring another lockdown. But I mean, it's you have to do it. You have to do it. All right, so thank you, everybody. And okay, yes, we've ended the last few episodes saying "Ciao, Mama," which "Hi, Mom" in Italian. And so thank you to our guests for being on the show. It was great. Benedetta, it's your turn to say goodnight, and then we turn off the lights.
I'm gonna say "Ciao, Mama" because I never say it, so I think it's my turn. But no, thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sharing your projects and hanging out with us and ending our show on such a high note.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.